If you don't have a booklet, hopefully you have a copy of the text. Everybody get one? Anybody not get one? You need it. Right. So we'll take just a few minutes. We'll be able to take a ton of time this morning, just in our nice awkward silence time, while we let you read down through it. Give you about enough time to read through it twice. Take note of anything that jumps out at you, especially anything that connects back to something else we've read in any of John's writing. This one is a good bit different than 1st and 2nd John, but hopefully you've been able to at least get exposed to the text already before tonight, this week. But we'll take about 4 or 5 minutes here and let you read down through it, and then I'll read it aloud and we'll get into it. So go ahead and dig in. Copy paste error. Verse 9. It should be first, not just erst. Hopefully you're able to pick that up. But all right, so I'm going to go ahead and read it aloud and we'll dig into it. So 3rd John, the elder to the beloved Gaius, whom I love in truth. Beloved, I pray that all may go well with you, and that you may be in good health as it goes well with your soul. For I rejoiced greatly when the brothers came and testified to your truth, as indeed you are walking in the truth. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth. Beloved, it is a faithful thing you do in all your efforts for these brothers, strangers as they are, who testify to your love before the church. You will do well to send them on their journey in a manner worthy of God, for they have gone out for the sake of the name, accepting nothing from the Gentiles. Therefore, we ought to support people like these, that we may be fellow workers for the truth. I have written something to the church, but Diotrephes, who likes to put himself first, does not acknowledge our authority. So if I come, I will bring up what he is doing, talking wicked nonsense against us. And not content with that, he refuses to welcome the brothers and also stops those who want to and puts them out of the church. Beloved, do not imitate evil, but imitate good. Whoever does good is from God. Whoever does evil has not seen God. Demetrius has received a good testimony from everyone and from the truth itself. We also add our testimony, and you know that our testimony is true. I had much to write to you, but I would rather not write with pen and ink. I hope to see you soon, and we will talk face to face. Peace to you. The friends greet you. Greet the friends, each by name. So, jumping into the letter here, first I want to hear, who are the characters that you see in the text?
Again, it starts with the elder.
So we have the elder again, which we have come to understand, we're pretty sure is referring to who? Yeah, to John. So we noted back in 2 John, that's the way that book started. Pretty much the writings dating right back to the first century and early second century. Pretty well immediately accepted each of these letters as being from John, even though they never claimed to have been from John. And one thing, the fact that he titles himself the same thing, the elder here, the same as he did in 1 John or 2 John, which looks so much like John's writing. This still looks like John's writing, though it looks some different. But the fact that he titles himself the same there as here makes us pretty confident that this is John, as well as having a number of, just a lot of similarities in just how it's written and some of the words he uses and things like that. Who else? Who are the other characters?
Diotrephes.
Yeah, we have Diotrephes. Good guy, bad guy?
Well, he's not too well spoken of here.
Yeah, no, sounds like kind of a jerk. Who else do we have? Demetrius. And good guy, bad guy? Good guy, yeah. So Demetrius is great, receives good testimony, kind of a stark contrast to this Diotrephes guy. Who else do you see? Gaius, so yeah, whoever he sent this letter to. Any other Gaiuses we know of? There's a few, don't need to dwell on that too terribly much, but there is a couple guy, or maybe three Gaiuses, depending on if we don't really know exactly are the same person or different people, that kind of thing, through Acts. Maybe this could be one of those Gaiuses. We really don't know, and we don't know to what region this letter is sent. There are a lot of people that think the epistles of John were sent to the Ephesians in some ways. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think 2 John is the only one that's actually addressed to a church. You'll notice 1 John is never addressed to anyone, and like pretty much the rest of the epistles are addressed to somebody. It more looks like a sermon that was written down and sent around everywhere, as opposed to, and even the scope of it is not near as specific. Scope of this letter, specific or general?
Very specific.
Extremely specific, hyper specific. So we've kind of gone from general to more and more specific as we go through here. 2 John being to a church, and now we have just one guy that this is written to. Any other characters you see?
Brothers.
Yeah, these brothers. You've got brothers, and then you've got friends down at the end. So, who are these brothers mentioned in 3 and then again in 5?
They seem to be somebody almost like Paul, where they're going to different churches and working.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think that's exactly right. These seem to be people who are working for the gospel, that are traveling around and needed support. We see down closer to the end, in 10, Diotrephes is not welcoming the brothers, and not only that, he puts people out of the church who try to welcome the brothers. Did 2 John talk any about receiving versus not receiving teachers who are traveling around?
Verse 10.
Yeah, so what does he say there?
Well, if they're not teaching what they should, you shouldn't accept them in their house.
Yeah, absolutely. Which kind of connotes the idea, what should you be doing to those that are teaching the truth? Yeah, you should be accepting them into your house. You should be bringing them in. You should be supporting them. In that day and age, we talked a little bit about these kind of people. They would have been working out of an individual's house when they traveled to an area and being supported by financially. That's the whole idea of true hospitality. And who is showing that hospitality here in 3 John? Gaius, yeah. So it seems like what has Gaius done that Diotrephes refuses to do?
He's done a lot. It says things you do in all your efforts for these brothers, even though they're strangers.
Yeah. So he doesn't know them. He is apparently. Done enough for them that they have given this good report back to John, that they can see he's walking in the truth. So even though they're strangers, it sounds like he's received them into their house. What would make us think that? Yeah, so kind of he gives an admonition that we ought to support people like this, and what else makes it sound like he's received these people?
Now he can send them on their way.
Yeah, they must be with him if he's going to be able to send them on their way in a manner worthy of God. And what do you think he means by that?
Set them up so that they can be successful in the next place.
Yeah, exactly. So I think kind of the most obvious one, financially. So you'd be setting these people up to where they can eat, and taking care of them in that way, and I would imagine making sure that maybe letters are sent ahead of them to where they understood that, hey, these are faithful brothers that need to be received, that are teaching the true gospel here, and that kind of idea. So you have a kind of contrast here between a couple different characters who are doing the correct way of receiving these kind of traveling preachers and brothers, and one who is doing kind of the exact opposite that we don't want to emulate.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of the idea of when you did it to the least of these, you did it to me.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's an excellent point. And yeah, that definitely plays out here, and especially when you see strangers as they are. So how big of a deal was it, though, for Gaius to accept these brothers?
So much so that they told John about it. They saw it.
Okay, yeah, it's helpful enough that they sent word back to John and that he was taking care of them. What else from the rest of the book here was, kind of makes the stakes a little higher for what Gaius has done?
Makes you wonder if he was the one that was kicked out by Demetrius.
Yeah, so he could at the very least, he was risking getting put out of the church by doing that. And he very well may be one of the individuals or the individual that has been put out of the church for receiving these brothers that are in fellowship with the apostles. So yeah, that's kind of what I was looking for there. A lot on the line with it. He himself may have been put out of the church, or is at the very least risking being put out of the church there by doing this. So big deal, and I think a lot we can learn from that. And he's doing the right thing. He's supporting the brothers, even when apparently an extremely influential individual is, opposing that within the church there. Want to kind of back up just a little bit and work down through the text here a little bit. Kind of just looking at the first couple of verses here. Let's say 1 through 4. Any repeating terms that you see there? Truth. Yeah, exactly. Or what else?
Walking in the truth.
Yeah, walking in the truth. So, kind of to start out, whom I love, beloved guys, whom I love in truth. And then rejoice greatly when the brothers came and testified to your truth, as indeed you are walking in the truth, and I have no greater joy than to see my children walking in the truth. Knowing kind of the times that he's speaking in and kind of what we've talked about so far, what is the truth that John has, we know John has talked about?
Christ is Messiah.
Yeah, exactly. So the messiahship of Christ, then accepting that and that whole idea. However, I do want to ask kind of overall, looking down through this text, we know Diotrephes here is not a great guy or a great character. Do you think that Diotrephes could be, who is he? Is he somebody who maybe could be like one of these false teachers that we've talked about in 1st and 2nd John? Yes, no, maybe, why? Or why not?
Somebody who likes power. If he puts himself first and he's not about furthering the gospel, he's more about keeping people in his pecking order, is what it sounds like.
Yeah, so in that way, that he sounds like some of those false teachers, in just that he's puffed up. He loves the preeminence, loves to put himself first. What other evidence could we see one way or another? Yeah, so he's not acknowledging the authority of the apostles. Another one that makes us think, okay, he does kind of see that those aspects make him kind of sound like that. Yeah, Wes.
Chapter 4 of John, 1 John. It's saying here that listening to the gospel of the Lord is being of God. Whoever is not from God does not listen to us. Obviously, the spirit of truth and the spirit of error. And the same equation between the Antichrist, or those who are not anointed, or those who have gone out, is those who do not, who are not of God. And so this idea that listening to the apostles' teaching is not of God, therefore he's not listening to the apostles' teaching. He is not of God. He may not be like saying that Christ isn't the Messiah, or they didn't come in the flesh. He may not be refuting that. He's definitely not listening to the apostles' teaching.
Absolutely. And I think those are, at the very least, this guy fits a lot of the characteristics that he described about those false teachers. What is his issue? Does he actually have a doctrinal issue in that way? Or is he denying the messiahship or sonship or the incarnation in those ways that we saw those other ones? I don't think we can quite see that here. However, all of these other descriptors, he really falls into. He's not recognizing the authority of the apostles. He is puffed up in this way. One thing I would tend to believe he's probably not in the same kind of group of exactly the type of false teachers that he talks about with in 1 and 2, just based on the fact of what is one of the main descriptors he gave, at least of the fellowship, or the status of the fellowship of those false teachers that he talks about in John 1 and 1st and 2nd John. Are they in the church or out of the church? A better way to ask it. Yeah, their main descriptor is these are those who have gone out. That's kind of they're the gone out ones. They've left. They've gone out from us. And so I don't know that you necessarily get the idea of that he is somebody who's denying Christ in that way. And you don't see him really make any arguments to that point throughout the book. It seems more likely this guy is just arrogant and puffed up and wants to be in control and not let other people tell him what to do. Yes, Andrea.
He's evidently got a problem with taking the gospel to the Gentiles, because the people who are coming in on their way to the Gentiles that need to support, he's refusing them and putting people on the church that are trying to support them.
Yeah. I mean that is definitely one way to take that, but at the very least, he's not. He's refusing to accept these people for one reason or another. And then, so you kind of mentioned, are you talking about the accepting nothing from the Gentiles part in verse 7 with that?
Yeah, and they're sending, Gaius is sending them on their way with support, because they're going like Paul did and not taking anything from the Gentiles.
Yeah, and what do you think he means by not taking anything from the Gentiles? Like, who are the Gentiles there in 7?
Gives that idea of like Paul amongst the Corinthians chose not to take any kind of be a sponsorship from anybody, so that he can preach the gospel freely and without this message being for their reason.
Yeah, and I do think there are a couple of different ways to take it, and that is absolutely one of them. Okay, so people are not wanting to appear as though they've done this for gain, or that they are improperly influenced by a certain group of people or anything like that. Another way to take it is, sometimes this word Gentiles is used more about just generally to describe pagans, okay? Not necessarily Gentile Christians as opposed to historically Jewish Christians, but okay, these are pagan individuals that these brothers that have gone out for the sake of the name are not, they're not accepting money and going in and amongst pagans in that way, or could just be this idea of not wanting to appear overly influenced by one specific group or that kind of idea. I don't know. Any other thoughts on that? Because that was one that I went ahead and wrote a question mark over on what exactly he's getting at there. We see a lot of Gentile kind of names here. Gaius these aren't Jewish names. So these are probably predominantly, Gentile groups, at least historically, which is kind of what leads me to think, okay, it's not necessarily that he's not, these people aren't accepting any money from the Christians that are supporting them as much as, the worldly people around them in that kind of way. So let's drop down a little bit here and kind of dig in verse 8. Therefore we ought to support people like this, that we may be fellow workers for the truth. What do we learn from that statement there? What do we take away from that?
Well, that gives people hope who cannot, for one reason or another, go and teach or do something. Because by supporting, you are a fellow worker for the truth. And so the person watching the baggage is just as important as the guy going to war, is what David made a rule. The same thing here. God says, just that cup of cold water. It doesn't matter what you're doing as long as you're doing it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's easy for us to think, okay, to evangelize. Okay, that's what the people do. for one reason or another are able or called or whatever to go to some other country and do this and that. I think Dan hit the nail on the head. The person watching the baggage is just as important. And it's not that when we aren't, if me with my family and this and that am not able to go travel and live this kind of a lifestyle where you're going around and being supported from wherever you are, doesn't mean, okay, I'm absolved from the work. It means, okay, I have a pretty strong charge here, ought to support people like this. And in that way, we become fellow workers for the truth. So I think it's kind of in one side, a feel-good kind of thing, like, hey, I can truly be a part of this work by financially supporting it. And I think that's true. It's so true. Like, you cannot have people going and being able to preach the gospel full time without a lot more people going to a normal secular job every day. One does not happen without the other. Somebody has to pay for it and make that happen. And I think that's a way in which each and every one of us, and myself, can look at a job that I may not like, or a career that isn't all that fulfilling to me in one way or another, but my secular career becomes fellow working for the truth when it is supporting people who to do this kind of work. And I think that's kind of transformative, even to how I view. We have the idea like you do your work as if for the Lord, but you do your work as if for the Lord, as in I'm going to work really hard and make money so that I can support people who are doing the work of the Lord, and very, not just a kind of theoretical aspect, but a very real aspect. And on that note, we read a lot of things in the scripture that we can almost take away from it and think, okay, it's bad to make money, or is it somehow inherently evil to have a really high-paying job and or work a lot to make a lot of money? I think it's clear that obviously the root of all evil, love of money is the root of all evil, and things like that. However, these things don't happen without people that have extra and a surplus and that are working hard in order to do that, and that to be able to happen. Obviously, the gospel can be done even out of people's deficit and Christians that don't have excess. But it just shows a responsibility as well as a fellowship that we can have together. And I think that the idea, how he says fellow workers for the truth, is a really good way to understand true biblical idea of fellowship. It's not getting together and eating together. It's things like, I'm working and funding you to be able to do this that I can't do. And thus we are sharing in that work together. That's fellowship. That is a lot closer to the biblical idea of what fellowship is in that kind of a way. Any other thoughts on that?
These are people that don't love money as their own. They view it as from God and still belonging to God, and they're merely stewards of it.
Absolutely. That's an excellent way to put it, and I think that is very true. So dropping down to verse 9 here, where he kind of gets into this. Well, let's just kind of take 9 through 10 there. What do you take away from what he has to say about Diotrephes, and what can we learn from that? What jumps out to you as interesting that it says about him?
It's not obvious, but the situations that I've seen where these kind of things happen are cases where there's not elders, and it makes you wonder if there weren't other men that had authority that could step in and say, look, this is a group action. You're not the head honcho, and to basically put him in his place, so you gotta rein him back. And this, just in my experience, when you have a lot of smaller churches that are kind of out there, they don't have elders, what happens? Generally, it's a person that has pretty strong personality. They just kind of work their way up. And the problem with that, though, is this might be a person that's not qualified to be an elder, and then now he's trying to function as an elder, and you've got
One
the
man
same.
elder nonetheless.
Well, yeah, you got the situation like 1 Timothy 3, right? Here's a person that's not qualified, doesn't have the maturity. He's now in trying to take that position. And he's falling into the same trap of pride that the devil's fallen in, and he's now got himself, a whole kind of following, and he's lost a lot of the mindset and goal he needs to have.
Absolutely, I think that's exactly right. Wes?
I was gonna say, you mentioned before, he seems like a guy who has influence. And what is John's goal to do if he comes? He will bring up what he's doing. And sometimes you kind of shake the point. Person that is strong personality might have a lot of influence and a lot of people like him. That doesn't mean that you don't just bring up what they're doing.
Absolutely, yeah, and the having the strength to do that and to oppose him, which both John and Gaius are apparently doing in some capacity. What else do you see? What is he saying about John or those that are with John or the apostles, whenever the time period is here?
He doesn't even acknowledge John's authority, and John was one of the apostles. And evidently John has written to the church about this, but he still just kind of blows by it.
Yeah, you get this idea that John has already tried to write to this church, and apparently Diotrephes got the letter and tore it up and threw it away, and didn't let it get to the people. And so now John has to kind of circumvent him in a way and talk to this guy who's probably already been ousted by Diotrephes because he sent some brothers on top of it to try to go address the issue, and he's kept them from getting in as well and put people out of the church who recognize or talk to or receive them. And so now he gets word back, oh good, Gaius has accepted the brothers. Let me send a letter to him and tell him what I think about this. So Diotrephes has apparently been working pretty hard, not only keeping the teaching via letters as well as via brothers being sent to this church to try to rectify this situation. And he's doing all of this to circumvent it. But Gaius is this little light within the group here who's accepting the brothers, and hey, I can get some teaching off to him. But as we see, not only that, he wants to come and go ahead and see them face to face and bring this up with them. What else? The other thing I was going to say, it says he's talking wicked nonsense about them. That's interesting. Yeah, Shane.
Well, do you want to say more about that?
No, you go ahead first.
Well, the point I've made about these two corresponding texts in 2 John and 3 John are actually what they teach us about fellowship and how we can miss it. Because on one side, we can have in the wrong person in the church, and then here's the opposite. We're not letting in the right person into our church. And they're both equally rebuked. They're both equally seen as these are bad categories to fall into. And so this really makes it clear on both sides of it. Is, are they holding to the doctrine, particularly of the apostles? What have the apostles been teaching? And that's the standard. And if you hold people to that, then you can be in connection with the right people and not in connection with the wrong people.
Absolutely, I think that's a really, really good point and takeaway. We often wonder why which letters ended up being lucky enough or whatever, God's hand over it. Making sure that they were preserved among probably the hundreds of writings that the apostles probably did. And we have this letter about, hey, this punk Diotrephes is putting people on, it's not on the surface something that's like, oh, we were need to be really sure this circulates to everybody, but you have kind of crucial things in both of these texts where you have this idea of who you allow into the church and who you do not, and who, and being extra strict and overly strict on it is not right. One person I was listening to brought up the idea that, you have a time when there are a lot of teachers traveling around, and there's gonna be some confusion. Hey, is this message from the apostles? Is this not? Are you in fellowship with the apostles? Are you not? Is the teaching you're bringing in line with what I've heard so far, or is it not? And any time when you have apostasy arising, you're going to have groups that could go kind of to the ultra protective, ultra conservative, I don't want to say, but potentially ultra conservative or restrictive idea where I want to be really sure that we don't let any kind of apostasy into this church. And maybe Diotrephes could be sitting there saying, and so any traveling preacher that comes around, he is not coming in here. Period. And that obviously would not be the right thing to do. Or just because it doesn't quite sound right or it's a little bit different than exactly how I've understood, I'm not going to take time to really weed that out. I'm just going to go ahead and put this person out of the church right now before we even hear of it. And I think that is something that this can kind of teach us against in a way. While at the same time, hey, this guy is not sitting down and saying, hey, does this match up with apostolic authority and teaching? He's just saying, you're on the outside, you're not coming in here to my space. Yeah, Shane?
The thing that kind of jumped out to me as you were saying that is that's what actually happens in hyper-restrictive situations. When we try to hyper-restrict something, the natural outcome, though, is we actually end up missing a part of obedience that God expects us to do and share it. And if you go through and you say, blanket, we're just not going to have anybody in, then you have missed exactly what he said in verse 8, that you ought to be participating and doing, sharing with these fellow workers. And that's just how, if we stay on this pendulum of going back and forth, we're going to miss. There's a critical element that God wants, not just, he wants you to stay there, but there's a reason he wants you to stay right there in the middle, because you're able to then complete whatever action he's needing.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think that's really, really important to take away from this kind of teaching, because in our day and time, at least within our fellowship, we don't obviously in the world around, we do see some of this. Not many people that we're worried about coming in here and teaching that Jesus isn't actually the Messiah, or something like that. However, this kind of situation that's described here is probably something that is extremely applicable to us and our churches at times. There can often be times where you have one person rise up and kind of take control, and everything's got to go through them. Oh, this person's going to be a part of it. Well, we better be sure Diotrephes is okay with that. And well, he didn't quite meet his checklist, and he's off on this nitty-gritty belief here. So nope, out of the church. You are not going to be a part of this. As opposed to dealing with love, recognizing the things that we have in common, and learning and teaching together. These aren't things that we should take and say, like in 2 John, that idea of those that weren't bringing the teaching about Christ to, you don't even greet them, you don't have anything to do with them. Okay, we all got to remember that was a teaching about whether or not Jesus was the Messiah, not should we have our pews in a circle or in rows, okay? And we can take it to these kind of really silly nitty-gritty things. And I mean, I've seen within my very short lifetime congregations withdrawing from others about things as silly as pew arrangement and time of meeting, how many services they have, things like that, that are not things that biblically should be breaking fellowship between brothers. And even still today in time, we have cities with 20 churches within a couple blocks of each other, and they're rendered not useless, but much less effective in their communities because they are just spread out. It's just, birdshot over a community as opposed to the impact that could be had when Christians have fellowship and accept one another and don't split each other over nitty-gritty stupid things. Anyway, little bit of a soapbox. But so moving on down here, verse 11, beloved, do not imitate evil, but imitate good. Whoever does good is from God. Whoever does evil has not seen God. Does that sound like John? Yeah, so now we're definitely getting back to stuff that sounds a lot like him and some statements that he has made or has made really similar ones. And he makes us, don't imitate evil, but imitate good. And then what does he do? And verse 12 there.
He name calls again, but it's a good way.
Hey, by the way, don't imitate evil, imitate good. By the way, here's the good. Look at Demetrius. He has a good testimony from everyone. He has a good testimony from the truth itself. And we also add our testimony. He's great. He's one that you should be listening to instead of this Diotrephes guy. Maybe he's one of the people in this church. Maybe he is somebody who he is sending to them. I kind of think that lean toward thinking, hey, he could be somebody who is among them that, kind of Paul or John giving this approval to him and this guy's character could help him have a little bit more influence in the church. What do you think he means by him having received a good testimony from the truth itself?
He's living what he preaches.
Okay, so and another way we might say that is his character. His character is actually aligning with the things that he is teaching. How else? What could that mean?
Well, it's great if people talk well about you, but if you actually didn't line up with the truth itself, it really wouldn't matter.
Yeah.
But if you line up there and you have this other support from good testimony, that's great. But there may be a situation where you're not really spoken well of, but the truth speaks well of you.
Yeah, and that could be a case here where those that are in league with the apostles give him great testimony. People that like Diotrephes probably hate this guy. However, the truth gives him a good testimony. You almost see this idea where the gospel and the truth of the gospel and the character that describes is personified as a witness here. And since he lines up with what the truth describes as the character of one of God is, that is giving a good testimony about him and who he is. And that comes back to this idea of, hey, when we get a teaching, we get a person, we pair it up with the apostles' teaching. With what has been given, with what we are, with what we know the truth is in the Word, and that is what ends up lining up in who we accept in that kind of way. Kind of coming near to the end of our time. Not only they give them a good testimony, every given gives them a good testimony, truth gives them a good testimony. And you know that our testimony is true. And yeah, go ahead, Shane.
I know that this is kind of you kind of step back and look at what's actually happening here. But when you think about what's being said about Demetrius, how do you want to be remembered? And you think like the actions and behaviors that you deal with on a normal daily basis, it's like just right here. It's not going to really impact people beyond me and subsequent generations and on. Guys, it's 2,000 years later, and we're remembering the way that certain people acted and operated. Obviously, they're putting God's word, but it was people like Austin and Wes and Shane. Like his name is written there, and how he's spoken about by the scripture and by the apostles is a record. It's been put in a book that's going to be examined. And we may not have it written down in the scripture, but it is written in a book. And it will be brought up, and it will be discussed, and we will have our approval from the truth are from other people. And it just, there's something to be said about the lasting memory of the actions we do on a regular, daily basis.
Yeah, it is really, really easy to think what I say and do now is done and forgotten. And obviously, thank God we have forgiveness for the boneheaded things we've said and the way we've treated our brothers improperly. However, this is a great reminder. What we do is written in a book and remembered, and we need to look like Demetrius, and try to preserve that fellowship and the truth and the gospel. So that kind of wraps up our study, or well, I should say, any other comments or thoughts you guys have as we wrap up here? It's been a really great study. I've really loved studying this with you all. I'll remember it for a long time. Sunday, Byron will be kicking off Revelation, I believe, and I won't be here, but it's going to be great. I'll tune in.
Read the whole book.
Brent, did you say bring the whole book?
I said, before Sunday,
Oh.
read the whole thing.
Read the whole thing. I thought you said you're reading the whole thing Sunday. I was
We
like,
are.
Even better. I like
We are reading
it.
the whole thing Sunday.
Excellent. Very good. Well, at least that's the easy makeup work for me since I'll be gone. Thank you all.